The one memory that stands out the most for me, oddly enough, I always think of it, it was sort of one of those lightning bolt moments that you have as a painter. And I was working on a still life, and the still life had a copper lamp in it, one of those old oil lamps, and the dust had settled on top of the lamp. And I was thinking in my mind, it's a copper lamp, I've got to paint it copper colored, right? But no, the dust had made a sort of a green note, color note, that I hadn't anticipated. It was like I could hear the angels singing. It was an unbelievable moment, because for the first time it occurred to me that the mind's eye wants to call something a given color or make it a certain shape without really appreciating what real color it is by seeing it just for what it is, as a shape or a color. So it was kind of a turning point for me at that point. The interesting thing about the way a painter's career develops is there are times when you have a flirtation with a given period in art history. So for a time, for example, I was going over to France and I was painting in Claude Monet's gardens in Giverny. So I had this tremendous, the only way to say it is flirtation with this French Impressionist light and color and brilliance, and you try to assimilate that into your own work. So what happens is, as you assimilate that, you gain new skills. But what inevitably happens is you lose some of the sophistication you had earlier from some other flirtation you had. And now your task is to how do you blend those two things together, and then still yet other things come along that you want to experiment and assimilate. So I always think of it as like a stew. All these various influences go into the pot, and then eventually what comes out, ideally, if you're true to yourself, is you come up with something very honest and unique, because it's your voice, it's nobody else's voice. My favorite part of the art making process is there's the start of a painting, which is very energetic, very free. The application of paint is very rapidly put on. I always liken it to paint splattering the walls and the ceilings and the floors, because it's just so much fun to just go in there with lots of gusto and get it started. There's an odd period in between that's very difficult at times. As you're developing the forms, you're refining them, it takes a little bit of, it's like a wrestling match is what I liken it to. And once you're done with that really difficult part of it, then there's the finishing process, which is, along with the start, one of my favorite periods, because that's when you begin to coalesce the whole thing into this very harmonious unit. And finishing touches are the things that really make it special and separate from what it had been all that time. In the largest possible sense, where I draw my inspiration from is nature, and nature with a capital N. And sometimes people assume that when you say nature, you're only talking about trees and streams and clouds. But nature for a painter is more than just that. It's the way light falls in through a window and describes objects. It's the way light would fall across a face. To me, that is the absolute most thrilling thing, to see what light and color and atmosphere does to objects. And to try to record that poetically and truthfully is an experience that's second to none for me.
I've always loved art, and I've always kind of been the kid in the class that got to do the bigger part of whatever art project it was in grade school, But I never considered it as a profession. And so I went to UC with the idea that I was going to go to medical school and become a doctor. A surgeon is what I wanted to do. And I started taking art classes for a couple reasons. One, a surgeon who I was kind of following around said, it would help with sculpture skills, get some using your hands, a little bit more manual dexterity. So I started taking art classes, also to help boost my GPA. I thought it would help that way, and it did. Working in hospitals, I sort of, wasn't sure I wanted to do it after I really got in it. And I really just kind of fell back in love with art. That UC really didn't stress realism when I was there too much, so that's what I was drawn to. So when I kind of found Carl Sampson, who we're going to interview here in a little bit, And I saw a painting he did of a figure model that we were painting at UC, and we were all doing just terrible paintings of. And his was amazing. It was I didn't know anybody alive could paint like that anymore. And so the model gave me his number, and I tracked him down and just begged him to teach me what he knew. And although he was too busy at the time, he pushed me in the right direction. And so I studied with somebody who had similar training to him in New Hampshire. And then I went to New Hampshire to study at Paul Ingbertson School of Drawing and Painting. In New Hampshire, it's almost like it was almost like a religious experience. It really was. I mean, I got there and I was pretty terrified. I had never seen the school. I didn't know anything when I got there. But then when I finally got there, I felt like this is exactly where I need to be. This is usually a point in the story where I start crying, but I'll try not to do that. But it was just the ability to finally have somebody who was a master of their craft teach me how to do it as well, and show me the steps that it takes to paint a truthful image. Lately, I've been inspired a lot by just memories of childhood. And so when you look at my paintings, I think you'll see a lot of things that I remember that were pleasant memories from being a kid. And I do a lot of stuff that are kind of two scenes that kind of work together, so to be like the father and son image back here. And so it's just, I try to create a mood of just what it was like. Like I was painting a picture called Monster Attacks at Breakfast. And it's just a scene of a breakfast scene where a kid's obviously playing with his toys, creating this war that happens in the midst. So there's a dinosaur toy and some soldiers. And it was just fun because what happens is you kind of become a kid again. And I was like, well, you know, some of these soldiers have to be knocked down. So I would push them over. And you're just kind of playing with your still life setup to create this scene. And the thing that I find fascinating is I just, I've got a huge collection of basically junk that I have saved over the years. I've got all my old toys from when I was a kid. You know, when I grab that stuff off the shelf, I remember things that I haven't thought of, in 30 years. And it's amazing that it's just, as I paint, these just emotions kind of well up. And what I hope is that shows in the final image. So I would say, for me, the inspiration can come from somebody handing me a teacup. What do you think of this? And what I kind of try to do is build scenes and little vignettes that hopefully will create a story.
At the time, I was working at a pharmaceutical company and not doing anything with my artwork, and there was a job opening at Cincinnati Nature Center. And before then, I had always just gone there to use their bookstore. They had a great bookstore, and they had an opening for an artist, which I applied for and got the job. And it was like a complete switch from working in a chemistry lab to then all of a sudden being an artist and illustrating nature subjects. I worked on their exhibits and all their various publications, and did illustrations of natural history subjects, illustrations of birds and plants and whatever they needed for their educational programs. Being a nature artist, you learn about nature, and vice versa. When you learn about nature, you become a better artist. And as an artist, especially with my illustrations, when I wanted to get the detail, it really forces you to look closely at your subject. You look how a plant or an animal or insect is constructed. You really see those details, and that helps you learn. Well, I grew up in Cincinnati, over in one of the western suburbs, but it really wasn't a suburb. It was more or less out in the country. There's lots of space, lots of woods and fields for us kids to run around in. And I think just being exposed to that as a child, being immersed in nature, kind of instills a real respect and love for the outdoors. And as a child too, I loved to draw, and my drawings were always, birds or plants, natural things. And I think maybe growing up at a time when we were outdoors, out in nature all the time, kind of affects how I paint today.
I have done artwork my whole life. I think I got caught drawing caricatures of my second grade teacher and putting them in my desk, but I've always liked to draw. I think inspiration is a really interesting topic. I think it's very complicated because I think it goes beyond self. The inspiration that I have now is drawing from sources that aren't really so much my personal experiences. They are an interest in art history, an interest in the variety of inspirations that people have had. I am inspired by nature, but, and I think you'll hear a lot of my colleagues say that they're inspired by beautiful things outdoors, and I've certainly spent a lot of time doing that. So nature is inspiring, but nature by itself is actually not, for me, a sufficient inspiration. It has to tie, in my case, to some ideas, to a compelling idea. I've been a lawyer for 30 plus years, and I'm now really inspired by the notion that there's a common ground and interrelationship between art and law, and that there's a lot of art in law. And so that's currently an inspiration. I've thought a lot about, and in fact, I've just finished a book about looking at the law, particularly the US Constitution, through a visual arts lens. Because I think the Constitution is sometimes made too complicated for people. Supreme Court decisions, which I've waded through 89 pages of words, but actually a lot of the visual imagery and visual thoughts of the Constitution are artistic. So the Constitution is certainly an inspired document. Inspiration is something that we have in common between art and law. Composition is something that's important, intersection between art and law. Focal point. If I'm arguing a case, I have a Supreme Court argument on Tuesday, Ohio Supreme Court. I've had to develop a focal point because I've only got 15 minutes to stand up before the 7 justices and get to the point. Focal point's important in art. Balance is hard to define, but it's certainly central to both art and law. Scales of justice, all the balancing we're looking for in art. And finally, there's this concept of craftsmanship, which something well done, whether it be making a documentary, whether it be putting that final varnish on in the right way, or making something that you're proud of that says, I did this the best way I could do it. That's definitely common to art and law, and that it says to the viewer in really a persuasive way, because I think paintings are persuasive or not. But a persuasive painting, to me at least, is a painting that says, look here, look at the care and skill and craftsmanship that went into making this thing. And these are things that art and law both have in common, and I didn't start out thinking they were the same. I started out thinking they were different worlds, but they aren't really.
About 10 years ago, I began doing book covers. I had been doing magazine work prior to that, and I'd been kind of breaking into the national market, so I was fortunate enough to work for national magazines. So people in that world started knowing my work, and some of the publishers saw it and started giving me book cover assignments. And then somebody saw those book cover assignments and gave me a chance to do a picture book. In fact, the very first book I did was I Dream of Trains, and I fell in love because I felt like I'm meant to tell stories and tell stories with art. I've dedicated my life's work, my art, to children's literature, and I love all kinds of art. I love all forms of art, but for me, it just was a perfect fit. I mean, I love this idea that I can now write stories and illustrate them and actually connect to this broad audience. I feel like I'm a fine artist, and my art form is really that finished book. And for my art form to spend some time on the lap of a child with someone who loves them is a great feeling for me. I'm done. That's all I need. That's it. Otis the tractor came from two different areas. When I was in college in Lexington, one of the jobs I had in the summer was working on a horse farm. And the way we got around was on a wagon with our mowers and our weed eaters pulled by a tractor. And I got to drive that tractor. We'd take turns. And it was an old Ford, I believe, and it felt like it was 100 years old, but it had a job to do every day. And that was to crank up and take all those college boys over there. We baled hay with that same tractor. And it struck me even then as a college kid who really had no idea at that point I'd ever illustrate for a living or tell stories, that tractor has a job to do, and it's old as the hills, and it's rusty and old and dented, but it cranks up every day and contributes to the farm. So I love that. And then later, my family, my boys, Griff and Graham, and my wife Tracy, told stories, and they came up with this story about a tractor and the love between the tractor and the farmer's son. And I kind of took that story, refashioned it, and made the farmer's son the baby calf. And that's how Otis started.
I am from Chicago. I was born in Chicago, and for the first year lived with my parents in my grandfather's apartment, a flat, and my grandfather was an artist. So he would hang his paintings all over the walls. You'd have the smell of turpentine and cigar smoke, and I think it was a pretty good ingraining of enjoying, being in a studio and seeing paintings all the time. One of my first pictures shows me totally covered with mud. However, my mother did not get upset. She just hosed me down and laughed. And they always encouraged us as we were growing up to do artsy things, craft things. I mean, they bought us the Venus-colored pencils and the paint-by-number sets. And I think that helped push me, in this direction. I didn't really do a lot of painting growing up. I saw my grandfather's paintings, but only tried it a couple of times myself. I was more inclined to draw. So I've wanted to do oil painting for a long time, but not until about 2004 was I able to get into it. My father had died. He had left us some money, and I was able to afford art lessons. And my dad would be the kind of dad who would say, "Do what you want to do." So I knew it was okay with him if I took art lessons. And so I studied with Keith Klein down in Florence, Kentucky. And then after that, I got into the Cincinnati Art Club. And then I've had opportunities to really do some serious study with Carl Sampson. He's been my teacher for the last several years, on and off, and a mentor as well. When I see an object that I like, or that has an attachment, for me. For example, we lived in Pakistan for 10 years, and when I see objects brought back from there, or something we might already have that reminds me of it, I want to paint it. My husband and son went back to visit, and when they came back, they brought these curly-toed shoes called kusas. And when I saw that, when they walked in the door, I said, "Mine." And so I painted a picture of them. What I do on Facebook is pretty much every day I find paintings, and I post them. And there are a lot of times of obscure artists that not too many people have heard of, but their work's beautiful. And what's happening is that when I post a painting, I also include a tiny, tiny bit of history with it. I like to do that. Or I like to kind of think about it artistically and say, this is what I think about the composition or value abstract, behind everything. And so it becomes not only looking at the painting for people, but getting a little bit of education. And a lot of people like that. I've gotten to meet and to know artists that I certainly would not otherwise. I can ask someone, on a national level, could you critique my painting? And they say, sure. It's just amazing. And I think they challenge your ideas once in a while and make you think a lot more than if you were just alone in your studio.
First time I can remember actually getting into it is in the first grade. I had, how little kids are with, nowadays I don't think it's so precious, but back then you got a box of crayons. It was a really big deal, and especially me because I had just come from Germany. We hardly had anything. And I got this box of crayons, and I was just like, wow, look at these colors. People do it to me. People and the lighting. Oh my gosh, the light. It's just, I think every artist is just dazzled by the light. If you go out with an artist, just outside, they'll comment on the trees or the sky or whatever, or people, I see people everywhere that I would love to paint, and some of them are just the closeness of people, those moments between people. I just love that. I think that's pretty much overlooked by, because we're always looking at a computer or a cell phone. We don't even talk to each other anymore. So when I see people communicating or interacting, that turns me on. That coupled with the light is where it's at for me. I think that you can't help. When I started out painting, I remember back in the 60s, we're always looking for something new, something different. Well, guess what? You're new and you're different. And what you have to say and how you say it it's new. And once I realized that, and you can't fight it because you're who you are. And some people paint angry paintings, and they're well received. It doesn't matter what you paint. You just have to be true to yourself and just let it come. And this is who I am. I mean, that's, if anybody who knows me will tell you that. I remember one time we were downtown walking, Marlena and I, my daughter, and somebody walked up to us and said, "You're Marlena, aren't you?" And she said, "How do you know me?" And he says, "Oh, I've seen your painting. It's all over town."
I'm from Huntington, Long Island. Loved it there, loved the water. Moved here about 32 years ago. Came to work at Procter & Gamble. Came out of business school and ended up there. So what am I doing painting now? Well, I guess the painter in me was always there. As a kid, I grew up, my mom drew and painted, and she taught me early on how to draw, and it sort of came in a good way. She taught me about perspective. There's another great mentor named Woodall Young, who's a fisherman on the harbor. I sort of wore him down, chased after him in his boat, and he'd always be catching fish, and he took me under his wings and taught me about drawing, taught me about life, taught me how to fish. And I never got to paint. I was drawing all the time, and then when I was 12. A guitar came under the Christmas tree, and that kind of changed the focus from creativity, from art to music, and stayed with it. When I was 21, I got involved with the mandolin, and to this day I still play and record and write. The art came about from my oldest son, the painting side of it. In 2007, he was out in California. He came back, and we normally go on the river kayaking. We were going to do that. He said, let's do something different today. Let's paint. I said, oh, interesting. Let's try that. So we set up outside in the yard here and just started painting, and he's a very good artist. So I was not so good, but kind of got hooked. And so I didn't actually grab a paintbrush until I was 51, which is like 2007. And then since then I've been so fortunate to discover it late in life, but got a lot of catching up to do, a lot of discovery to do, but that's part of the journey, which makes it a lot of fun. More recently, I've been blessed to be mentored by C.W. Mundy. I paint with other painters too, and you're always learning. It's an unending journey. There's so much, and I think the other thing that's important is I paint a lot, and I've had to make up a lot in a shorter time. But I paint as often as I can. I paint frequently, and if it's not working out, I scrape and try to figure out what I learned from that, and then reapply for the next. Because we all struggle, we all have our times it works and the times it doesn't. So I try to learn from all those experiences. I love the spontaneity, and it's one of the things that draws me to paint on location, paint from life, is just that moment that's there, and you have limited time, everything's changing, the weather, the light, the surroundings, and you have to capture that, and trying to simulate all that in that short amount of time. That's my favorite part, and it's really that part of it. Backing up, I try to make sure that it's all the right design ahead of time, but when I get ready to go, I think through what I'm trying to do and come up with something. When you travel, it's really neat to be in downtown Paris, painting along the Champs-Élysées, and have people come up to you. Just engaging with people while you're painting, it's neat. Wherever that is, if you're in the Maine coast and you're out painting on the docks, you get some sailors come in. It's really neat to have them. You get a conversation. You paint some lobster boats, but I start talking about them and what they're catching and all, and you just get a relationship going from what you're painting, and they're interested, you're interested, and it's a connection, which makes it really fun and exciting.
I never know where to tell people I am from. Since I have traveled to all 7 continents, lived in about 8 different places as a child, I guess I have to say the longest I've lived anywhere is Cincinnati, so I'll call Cincinnati home. My favorite place in Cincinnati is my studio. People ask why I didn't set up in home, but I like the disconnect. And I like the fact that I have 7 windows and the north light facing. So painting under natural light inside is fantastic. Art is something that is inside a person, I truly believe, and as a child I was very artistic. I didn't have the opportunity to go to art school, and so it was latent, blooming in '92 when I was living in Italy, completing a marketing contract in Genoa. I had the opportunity to join young people painting in Tuscany. And to me, that was a dream come true. I picked up a paintbrush and my first set of oil paints, and with very little instruction, joined this young international group and 2 women teaching from Florence, Italy. I had 3 months to live above a cantina where Chianti wine was being produced. The wafting smells, the sounds of the birds from the vineyards, the olive trees, was heaven, and I couldn't stop painting. I have been painting ever since and returning to Italy for 15 years running. Drawing inspiration from those things which I love. I do think an artist must be passionate about what it is that they are choosing for subject in order to convey that through a 2-dimensional reality to the person looking at the artwork. I grew up with a father who was an outstanding gardener. My mother did flower arranging. I love color, I love flowers. So as I became more of a still life painter than a plein air painter, I gravitated to the flowers that I grow and arrange and paint here in the North Light studio.
I started drawing people when I was 7. I mean, I may have started before then, but I do have some drawings that I did when I was 7. So I started, my interest in drawing people's faces started then. When I worked in advertising at US Shoe for the first years out of school, and then I stayed home after having both my daughters. They were little babies, and I started designing dolls. So within 6 months of starting to design dolls, I went to my first toy fair. And in designing those, I started sculpting them. They had to be made completely, from sculpture all the way through to painted, wigged. If I'm doing portrait work, I'm really trying to draw the viewer into the individual through their eyes. Pretty much through the expression in the eyes and the emotions. A lot of times it's the body language. I think that those are the things that I try to, even if the figure is not dominant in a painting, I still feel like the body language, that's intriguing to me. And getting that right that's the puzzle. That's the part that I go for, and I'm just not happy until it really is there and working. And I think that that's the same way when I was working in the dolls. It was so vastly important, the eyes being the window to the soul. I felt like the dolls had to pull you in as well. And early on, I was the only person doing glass inset eyes and in a cloth doll. Actually, I was the first ever. But my true love is people and expression and emotion, and I'm very drawn with emotion. What challenges me is to get that on the canvas. The doll that won the World Congress of Dolls is a doll of my daughter with the glass-blown eyes. I won it in France. And that is and the curator of the Decorative Arts Department of the Louvre came through, and having won that, she chose one of my pieces for the permanent collection at the Louvre. And if anyone did do a retrospective at any time, they would see, that there is a thread that goes all through my work that is basically my muses being my children, my family, my friends. Sometimes total strangers. It depends on, I'm very figurative. Nothing I can do about that. It is who I am. And it doesn't matter. Something will really draw me. And a lot of times I end up going up to people and saying, "Hey, would you mind sitting?"
I started painting probably in my late 20s. I studied drawing initially and then illustration in undergrad, and it wasn't until after I had graduated with my undergraduate degree that I kind of took a fondness to want to learn how to paint. The main thing that I thought was lacking in drawing was color, and most of the work that we had studied in college as art students was painting. And I think that just by being inundated with the images that we were studying led me to want to kind of progress to something that was a little bit more resolved than drawing. I think for me the most exciting thing is to get the painting to kind of emerge from a point where I think I know where it's going to a point where just by trying to make it work pictorially, it starts to show itself. My process actually with my figures is to paint the figure from life. So I often have a model here in my studio working, and then I invent the space completely from a variety of sources, from photographs from my travels. And because there's nothing really before me that I'm kind of just replicating or trying to capture, there's always an element of fallibility where it may not work together, or it may look like it's been just kind of assembled in a way that looks artificial or doesn't seem like it would be natural. And when those things kind of all start to look like they are one experience or done like from one source, it's kind of magic, because for the first time it becomes concrete. And I think a lot of artists have that joy about seeing something go from idea to the finish. I've always had an interest in working with a figure. I think it stems from the fact that you know, a lot of the artists that I initially encountered, Rembrandt being one of them, always had figures, or the paintings that I think of with Rembrandt are figurative. And I think that, you know, just being a person and some of the subject matter that I wanted to talk about initially, you know, my parents having cancer and, you know, some kind of, you know, really kind of personal issues, it seemed as though the figure was maybe like the best vehicle as a subject to do that. You know, it's so loaded with psychology, with emotion, and, you know, as a person, I think we kind of relate to that inherently, maybe even unconsciously. And I think that to me was the thing that just seemed like it had the most potential for me personally. I feel like I related to it more than I did landscape or still life. Currently, I think history is becoming a bigger component in my work, both in terms of inspiration and in terms of idea. I think that most of my references to the subject matter that I paint now tend to be more about things that are non-art, related to things that are more about history or other cultures. And I think that a lot of that kind of stems from my travel. And between reading about things and then actually traveling there, you know, a lot of things I think that I passed over as a younger artist because it just seemed to be old or not cutting edge, has more resonance now as I get older. I think I find more in that work and the history and the age of things than I did maybe when I was younger.